This is Charter Local Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. We are joined today by Dr. Al Mijares. He is the Superintendent of Schools for Orange County, an elected position in this area. And I want to thank you for joining us. We're in Irvine today, actually at a National Faith Leaders Conference. A lot of focus on education. Obviously here they're looking at financial literacy, about lifting people up. I want to talk about California education, if I may.
Sure.
And as you know, California's adopted California state standards, the Common Core. Talk to me about how it's rolling out here in Orange County.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the California state standards, because these are the standards for the state of California, and some people know them as the Common Core, which are nothing more really than a reflection of 21st century learning skills. The importance of not only having the cognitive skills, but being able to apply it so that you can solve real world problems. And I think that's one of the things that our young people have struggled with. So we have kids who have subject level mastery, but when it comes to applying it as an entrepreneur would, they struggle with that. And really the whole purpose of education is to produce knowledge, and knowledge is equated to wisdom, where you're applying what you know. And
as I understand it, what Common Core, California State Standards, is focusing upon is, instead of touching on a lot of subjects and going thin, fewer subjects but going much deeper. And really digging down into the weeds with fewer topics, but learning those and mastering those.
Well, that's the pedagogical, which is the art of teaching and learning. That's the pedagogical asset of 21st century learning and the Common Core, or the California State Standards, because instead of going, as you mentioned, a mile wide, you're going deep. So it's forcing the learner to learn the subject well to the point of application.
Let me ask you not only about the learner, but the educator.
Sure.
How are the learners doing with Common Core? How are the educators doing with Common Core? It's a shift.
Well, it is a shift. In fact, that's one of the things that it is called, shifting from what we once had to a newer platform. But the educators, as they have always done in an organic fashion, are adapting and adjusting. It is different.
But here's the challenge for the educators. They need to be taught technology. The kids probably can teach them the technology, but I jest a bit. But do talk to me about the technological advances and bringing in computers, iPads into the classroom, because for the standardized tests, which we'll talk about, they're all on computers.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the technological advancements of our day are phenomenal, and in terms of real time, things are changing as we sit here and talk. So kids have to be abreast. They have to understand how technology can help them. And technology is a servant. It should be a servant, not the master.
Well stated.
So it's how it's applied. And indeed, we can all, learn by continue to immerse ourselves in this subject. Our young people today, they're natives. Most of them in the classroom today, they were born with technology. So there really isn't a gap, as we might
for
think.
them, for the teachers.
No. So they're very comfortable with devices, whether it be an iPhone or any kind of a handheld device, including a tablet. And it's not a big issue for them. One of the things we are finding, though, is that keyboarding is a necessary skill.
Typing.
So you watch kids type with 2 fingers, and they're good at it, but they can be a lot better if they use all 10 fingers.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. I have daughters, 8th and 6th grade, and when they were starting to matriculate into the junior high ages, every teacher said, we'd ask, what can we do over the summer for enrichment? Keyboarding. Fascinating.
Exactly. So it's interesting, because when in the old days you had typewriters, and everybody learned keyboarding, and some learned it in a formal way in a school setting.
I took typing.
So did I. And then it sort of faded away for a while, but now there is a resurgence of this. And so
I want to ask you about standardized tests.
Yes.
Love them or hate them, we got them. And they're part of evaluating the student performance. As we know, we had the CST in the No Child Left Behind days. Now we have SBAC, we can call it California Assessment of Student Performance and Progress, whatever it is. First set of results have been released, and the numbers are a bit disappointing, one could say. as it relates to statewide numbers, not Orange County, about 44% of students met English standards, 33% met math standards. That's tough. Those are low.
Well, the Orange County scores are much higher. In fact, we led the state with a couple of other counties in terms of being at the very top tier. But nonetheless, it is still in both, yes, both subjects. But remember now, you mentioned the CSTs, which were predicated upon the 1997 standards that were adopted by California. And it's not an apples-to-apples comparison, but if you go back and look at the first administration of the CSTs, they were actually lower in terms of percentiles.
Okay.
So we have Smarter Balance, which is the assessment here in California. And
I
frankly,
think it's important, though, that we do recognize that this is the baseline.
It's baseline information. We're testing new things. We're using devices. In some cases, the devices didn't perform as they should have, which all gets factored into this process of a raw number. But remember, the test scores are important because they're supposed to be normed based on national standards. And that's important. We want to know how our kids in California are competing with the other 49 states. But even more importantly is how are they competing nationally but also internationally.
Let me ask you, though, about the scores when you consider different communities. And this is, I think, apropos given we're in Orange County, a very diverse county.
Yes.
If you look at, for example, the English scores for Asian students, they met standards statewide at 72%.
Right.
Large Asian American community in Orange County, for example. Whereas African American students met English standards at 28%.
Right.
That is a gap the size of the Grand Canyon.
Right.
What does that say to you?
Well, it says to me that we need to do a better job as educators. And this is a perennial issue where we find students of color who are not doing as well as they should be doing. And there are some techniques that can erase these gaps. There are best practices out there that we know. The question is, how do you scale it? You can go into a wonderful school who has a wonderful classroom where that teacher's doing a phenomenal job, but that's not happening across that school or across the district. So we have to be mindful of what are the best practices and how do we scale them. But I want to say this, that there are some big issues. Sometimes, and I don't believe that poverty is impenetrable in terms of student achievement, but poverty does play a role.
Well, if you look at the numbers as it relates to economic disadvantage of all races, meeting standards in English, 31%. Meeting standards in math, 21%. So that's
that gets into issues of resources. It gets into issues of parent level of education, what happens before school. A lot of indoctrination happens from age 0 to 5 when they move into the school setting. How do you work with parents so that they can maximize their own interaction with their students so that the learning process continues? There are a number of things that we have to do. In my opinion, in a lot of ways, it gets back to political will. Do we have the will to educate all of our students? And that it wasn't coined by me, it was by Asa Hilliard, a social psychologist who is deceased now. And I think that it's a matter of mobilizing resources. It's a matter of having acute interest in what we're doing and focus. Like with anything else, are you focused? Has this been put under the microscope in a laser manner where you're going to make a difference? We've seen, for example, in a program that we're doing here in Orange County, it's called Encuentros Leadership. I don't know if that's come up here in these conversations, but Encuentros is a Spanish word for encounter and leadership. And
I'd like to have you back on the program. We can talk more about that program.
Okay.
Will that work?
Sure.
Okay. His name is Al Mijares. He is the Orange County Superintendent of Schools. My name is Brad Pomerance. This is Charter Local Edition.